The radar screens went silent at 3:47 hours. 5 F-16 Fighting Falcons, call signs Viper 1 through 5, vanished from every tracking system across 3 separate command posts. No distress calls, no emergency transponders, just empty air where $20 million of American firepower had been painting the sky moments before. The overnight watch officer at Bagram Airfield stared at his console, finger hovering over the red phone that connected directly to Central Command. His hand trembled. In 17 years of service, he'd never seen anything like this. Aircraft didn't just disappear. Not 5 at once. Not without a trace. The mission had been routine. A high-altitude reconnaissance sweep over the Coast Guard's pass, mapping insurgent supply lines threading through the mountains like capillaries. The F-16s had lifted off at 2:20, their Pratt & Whitney engines splitting the pre-dawn darkness with twin cones of afterburner flame. Viper lead was Captain Marcus Reeves, a third-generation fighter pilot with 200 combat hours and a reputation for textbook precision. His wingmen were hand-picked, sharp, disciplined. They'd flown together for 8 months. They knew each other's breathing patterns over the radio. Then the mountains swallowed them whole. The communications officer replayed the last transmission for the 4th time, listening through static for anything they'd missed. Viper Lead's voice came through clean and professional. Bagram Tower, Viper's entering phase line Dakota, descending to 18,000, visibility good, snow cover at 70%. 18 seconds later, absolute silence. The recording continued for another 3 minutes, nothing but the hollow hiss of dead air and the officer's own accelerating heartbeat. By 400, the situation room was packed. Colonels and captains crowded around glowing screens, faces painted blue by monitor light. Someone mentioned electronic warfare. Someone else suggested a Cascade equipment failure, though the odds of that happening simultaneously across 5 aircraft hovered somewhere near impossible. A major from intelligence proposed they'd been hit, but there were no surface-to-air missile systems in that region, no radar signatures, no heat blooms that would indicate a launch. The mountains in the Coast Guard's pass were a jagged maze of granite and ice, riddled with caves and narrow valleys where radar coverage fractured into blind spots. But 5 F-16s didn't just fly into a mountain, not with their terrain-following systems, not with their training. The base commander made the call. They needed eyes on target. They needed someone who could fly low, slow, and see what fast movers couldn't. They needed someone who knew those mountains like the lines on their own palm. Someone the textbook pilots quietly dismissed. Someone who'd been waiting for this moment her entire career, even if she didn't know it yet. Her name was Captain Lyra Kess, call sign Widow, and she flew the aircraft everyone else had written off as obsolete. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat on the apron like a gargoyle carved from titanium and spite, its twin General Electric turbofans mounted high on the fuselage, its nose stretched long and predatory around the GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon. Some pilots called it the Warthog. Others called it ugly. Lyra called it home. She'd been in the ready room when the alert came through, halfway through a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, reviewing maps she'd already memorized. The young lieutenant who delivered the briefing folder couldn't meet her eyes. He stammered through the details: 5 missing F-16s, possible crash site, search and rescue authorization, while staring at a point somewhere over her left shoulder. She'd gotten used to that look. 28 years old, 5'5", with dark hair pulled into a regulation bun, and a face that still got carded at the base exchange. Lyra didn't look like what people expected when they pictured an A-10 pilot. She'd made peace with that. What she hadn't made peace with was the whisper campaign that followed her through every briefing, every mission debrief, every casual conversation in the officers' club. Widow. They'd given her the call sign after her first combat mission, when her aircraft took so much ground fire that maintenance spent 3 days patching holes. She'd brought the plane home. Some said it was luck. Some said it was because she flew too cautious, too slow, too careful. The name stuck, carried on a current of barely concealed contempt. But tonight, caution was exactly what they needed. Lyra pulled on her flight suit in the empty locker room, the fabric still warm from the previous night's mission. Her hands moved through the ritual automatically, survival vest, G-suit harness. She checked her sidearm, her knife, her emergency beacon. In the mirror, her reflection looked back with eyes that held something the young officers hadn't earned yet, patience sharpened into a weapon. She'd spent 5 years flying close air support while the F-16 pilots collected glory at 30,000 feet. She'd learned every canyon, every ridgeline, every thermal current in these mountains. She'd memorized where the wind sheared and where the weather lied. While they practiced dogfighting over empty desert, she'd been down in the dirt, where wars were actually won. Outside, the November night was crystalline and cold, stars scattered like broken glass across black velvet. Her crew chief, Senior Airman Torres, waited by the A-10 with a flashlight and a clipboard. He'd been with her for 2 years, and he knew better than to offer empty reassurances. "She's ready, Captain," he said simply, slapping the armored belly of the aircraft. "Full combat load, extra flares, and I personally checked every system twice." Lyra nodded, running her gloved hand along the fuselage. The A-10 wasn't elegant. It was built around the gun, a flying tank designed to take punishment and keep fighting. 7 tons of ordnance capacity. Titanium bathtub protecting the cockpit. Redundant systems stacked on redundant systems. It could fly home on one engine, one tail, half a wing. It had before. She climbed the ladder and settled into the cockpit, the familiar smell of hydraulic fluid and worn leather wrapping around her. The instruments glowed to life as she ran through pre-flight, her fingers dancing across switches with muscle memory older than thought. When she radioed tower for takeoff clearance, her voice was steady, professional, empty of the adrenaline, probably hammering through the watch officers monitoring her frequency. Bagram Tower, Widow 11, requesting clearance for immediate departure, heading 270, search and rescue operation. The controller's response came back fast. Widow 11 cleared for immediate takeoff, winds 280 at 12 knots, altimeter 3012. Godspeed, Captain. The twin turbofan spooled up with a rising whine, and Lyra released the brakes. The A-10 rolled forward, accelerating down the runway with the determined momentum of something that refused to quit. At 130 knots, she pulled back on the stick, and the ungainly warbird lifted into the darkness, leaving behind the safety of the airfield lights for the vast unknown of the Hindu Kush. The flight to the Coast Guard's pass took 37 minutes. Lyra flew at 8,000 feet, low enough to follow the terrain visually, high enough to avoid small arms fire from the villages scattered through the valleys. The mountains rose around her like the walls of a cathedral built by a violent god, peaks crowned with permanent snow that glowed pale under starlight. Her radar was mostly useless here, too much ground clutter, too many false returns. She flew by sight and instinct, trusting her instruments only when the narrow canyons forced her to. Widow 11, Bagram control. The voice in her helmet was tight with controlled urgency. "Be advised, we've detected intermittent radar contact in your target area, multiple returns, possibly wreckage scatter. Recommend approach from the southwest. Use the Sharana Valley for initial reconnaissance." "Copy that, Control. Beginning descent to phase line Dakota now." Lyra banked the A-10 into a gentle turn, feeling the aircraft's weight shift beneath her. The Sharana Valley opened up below, a dark ribbon winding between granite walls. She descended to 6,000 feet, then 5, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of wreckage, any reflection of twisted metal, any scar on the snow where multi-million-dollar fighters had met the earth. Nothing. The valley walls pressed close on either side, near enough that she could make out individual rock formations in the starlight. This was A-10 country, too tight for the fast movers, too unforgiving for anything that couldn't fly slow and look hard. She activated her targeting pod, the infrared sensor painting the landscape in shades of gray and white, hot spots blooming where exposed rock held the day's warmth. Still nothing. No heat signatures. No debris field, just empty mountains keeping their secrets. Control Widow 11. Negative contact on initial sweep, expanding search pattern to grid Delta 4. Copy Widow 11. Be advised, weather system moving in from the northwest, expected arrival your location in 90 minutes. Perfect. Lyra pushed the thought aside and banked northwest, following the valley as it branched into narrower tributaries. The A-10 handled like a freight train compared to an F-16, but it was steady, predictable, honest. It told her the truth about the air, about the altitude, about what it could and couldn't do. She trusted that honesty more than any afterburner or high-tech avionics suite. Then she saw it. Not wreckage, not heat signatures, something else. A pattern in the snow along a ridgeline too regular to be natural. She circled back, descending another 1,000 feet, and the pattern resolved into clarity. Tracks. Vehicle tracks, multiple vehicles, cutting across a slope that shouldn't have had any traffic. They led toward a narrow canyon that didn't appear on her maps, a shadow between two peaks that optical satellites would miss and radar would dismiss as solid rock. Lyra's pulse quickened, but her hand stayed steady. She keyed her radio. Control, Widow 11. I have possible ground activity, grid Delta 47. Multiple vehicle tracks leading into unmapped terrain. Requesting authorization to investigate. The pause that followed stretched too long. She could imagine the debate happening in the operations center, whether to risk another aircraft, whether to trust the instincts of a pilot some of them still thought got her call sign out of pity. Then, Widow 11, you are cleared to investigate. Maintain altitude above small arms range. Do not, repeat, do not engage without authorization. Copy that, Control, investigating now. She nosed the A-10 toward the canyon, descending to 4,000 feet above ground level. The walls closed in on either side, steep and dark, barely 200 meters apart at the mouth. This was the kind of place smart pilots avoided. One engine failure, one wind shear, one wrong input, and you'd be a memorial plaque. But Lyra had stopped worrying about being smart years ago. Smart got you commendations. Effective got people home. The canyon opened into a narrow valley, and Lyra's breath caught. 5 F-16s sat on the valley floor, intact, arranged in a rough line like toys abandoned by a distracted child. Their canopies were closed, landing gear down, no visible damage. And surrounding them like ants swarming sugar, at least 20 vehicles, trucks, technicals, what looked like mobile anti-aircraft systems being positioned with careful precision. Men moved between the aircraft with purpose, carrying equipment she couldn't identify at this distance. This wasn't a crash site. This was a capture. Her mind raced through the implications even as her hands moved to her weapons systems. Electronic warfare. A sophisticated ambush. The F-16s hadn't been shot down. They'd been forced down, their systems compromised, their pilots given a choice between landing in this hidden valley or auguring into a mountainside. And now they were sitting ducks while someone built a trap around them, probably hoping more rescue aircraft would follow. Probably hoping for exactly what was about to happen. Lyra should have radioed Control immediately. Should have climbed out of the canyon and waited for a proper response. Drones, gunships, maybe a SEAL team if the pilots were still alive. Should have followed protocol, played it safe, lived up to her call sign. Instead, she armed her weapons and descended to attack altitude. The Avenger cannon in the A-10's nose held 1,200 rounds of 30mm depleted uranium, each projectile capable of punching through tank armor. The gun fired at a rate of 65 rounds per second, producing a sound that veterans said was like God clearing his throat before making a correction. Lyra had fired it in anger 14 times in her career. Tonight would be 15. She came in from the northwest, using a ridgeline for concealment, throttling back to just above stall speed. The vehicles below had no idea she was there. They were watching the sky for fast movers, for missiles and smart bombs, not for a gunship that belonged in a museum. Their anti-aircraft systems were pointed at high-altitude approach vectors, not down here in the weeds where only crazy people flew. Lyra toggled her targeting system, watching the Pipper drift across the largest vehicle cluster. Her thumb rested on the trigger. One squeeze, and this valley would become a killing floor. But if the pilots were in those vehicles, if they were being held somewhere she couldn't see, one stray round could make her a murderer instead of a rescuer. She needed confirmation. Banking hard, Lyra brought the A-10 around for another pass, this time even lower, barely 300 feet above the valley floor. Close enough to see faces turning upward in shock. Close enough to see the F-16 canopies and confirm what she was already certain of: they were empty. The pilots weren't in their aircraft. They were somewhere else, somewhere these people thought was safe. A line of tracers reached up from a technical, bright and lazy, and about 10 seconds too late. Lyra jinked left, though responding with all the grace of a drunk walrus, but responding. More tracers joined the first, drawing glowing lines through the darkness. She could hear impacts, the distinct plink-plink-plink of small arms fire hitting the A-10's armored belly. Tors was going to have a fit. Control, Widow 1-1 taking fire. I have 5 birds on the ground, intact, enemy force approximately company strength with mobile AAA. She kept her voice level even as she pulled the A-10 into a climb, gaining altitude and distance. I need immediate authorization to engage. Pilots are not with aircraft, likely held in canyon structures. Widow 1-1, negative. I say again, negative engagement. You are ordered to maintain observation altitude and wait for support package. Control, support package will take 90 minutes minimum. These people are already preparing to move the aircraft. If we lose them now. Widow 1-1, your orders are to observe only. Acknowledge. Lyra looked down at the valley, at the 5 F-16s sitting vulnerable on the canyon floor, at the men working with increased urgency now that they knew they'd been spotted, at the mountains that would swallow those jets forever if she let them. She thought about Captain Reeves and his perfect textbook flying, about his wingmen, probably zip-tied in some cave, listening to the sound of enemy fighters getting closer, about everyone back at Bagram who thought she'd gotten lucky, who whispered widow like it was a weakness instead of a warning. She thought about all the times she'd followed orders, played it safe, let the fast movers collect the glory while she did the work nobody wanted to talk about. Widow 1-1 acknowledges, maintaining observation. She killed the transmission before anyone could hear what came next. Then she rolled the A-10 inverted and dove back into the canyon, lining up her attack run with the cold precision of someone who'd stopped caring about anything except bringing people home. The Avenger cannon spooled up with a sound like industrial machinery achieving enlightenment. The targeting Pipper settled on the first vehicle cluster with mathematical certainty. And Captain Lyra Kess, call sign Widow, pilot of an obsolete attack aircraft that everybody had forgotten how to respect, opened fire. The night exploded into thunder and flame. The GAU-8 Avenger spoke with a voice that made mountains listen. Each burst lasted 2 seconds, 130 rounds downrange at velocities that turned vehicles into abstract art installations of twisted metal and regret. Lyra walked her fire across the first cluster of trucks, watching through her targeting display as 30mm rounds shredded engines, punctured fuel tanks, and convinced 24 enemy fighters that they'd chosen the wrong valley for their ambush. Secondary explosions bloomed orange and red, ammunition cooking off in sympathetic detonations that lit the canyon walls like a strobe. She pulled up hard, feeling the G-forces compress her into the seat, her vision narrowing at the edges. The A-10 climbed with stubborn determination, tracers chasing her wake like angry fireflies that couldn't quite catch up. At 2,000 feet above the valley floor, she banked left, scanning for her next target. The anti-aircraft system was tracking now, its twin barrels swinging toward her position with mechanical precision. That needed to die first. Lyra rolled right, pushed the stick forward, and dove again. The targeting Pipper drifted across her canopy, following the predicted path of her descent, and she made minute corrections with the trim. The anti-aircraft vehicle was parked near the eastern wall, operators scrambling to engage. They got off 6 rounds before she squeezed the trigger. 3 of those rounds passed within 10 feet of her canopy, close enough that she could see the tracers as distinct objects instead of blurs. The other 3 went wide. Her burst didn't miss. The anti-aircraft system vanished in a cloud of shrapnel and fire, its ammunition load detonating with enough force to crack the canyon wall behind it. Lyra pulled up again, her airspeed pushing 200 knots, and keyed her radio. "Control, Widow 1-1, I am Winchester on cannon rounds." Elishi had at least 700 rounds remaining, switching to Maverick missiles for precision strikes. "Widow 1-1, you are ordered to break off and return to base immediately. Acknowledge." She didn't acknowledge. She was too busy lining up her next run, this time targeting the structures carved into the canyon wall where her instincts said the pilots were being held. They looked like natural caves at first glance, but the entrances were too regular, too carefully concealed. Someone had spent time and money preparing this valley, probably for exactly this kind of operation. Capture American aircraft, study their systems, parade the pilots on video, and strike a propaganda victory that would echo through the region for years. Not tonight. Lyra switched her weapon selector to rockets, ignoring the increasingly frantic radio calls from Bagram. The A-10 carried 7 LAU-68 rocket pods, each loaded with 7 Hydra 70 rockets. 49 chances to make her point. She pickled off the first pod at 600 meters, the rockets streaming away in a rippling salvo that turned the eastern cave entrance into a collapsing memory. The concussion wave rolled across the valley, and for just a moment, the enemy fire stopped, everyone frozen by the realization that the ungainly aircraft above them was being flown by someone who'd lost their fear of consequences somewhere over the mountains. Then she saw movement. The western cave, 50 meters from where her rockets had struck. 5 figures running in flight suits, hands bound behind their backs, being herded by armed guards toward a truck that was already moving, already trying to escape. Lyra's heart rate spiked for the first time since entering the canyon. There they were, Captain Reeves and his wingmen, alive. She had maybe 10 seconds before that truck made it to the canyon exit and disappeared into the labyrinth of valleys beyond. The A-10 wasn't fast. It couldn't catch a truck in a sprint. But it didn't need to catch it, it just needed to stop it. Lyra rolled the aircraft 90 degrees, pulled hard on the stick until her vision grayed, and brought the nose around in a crushing high-G turn that the F-16 pilots probably would have called sloppy. She lined up not on the truck itself, but on the narrow section of canyon wall ahead of it, where the valley narrowed to barely 10 meters across. She pickled off her remaining rocket pods in one continuous salvo, 42 rockets screaming downrange in a stream of fire and smoke. They impacted the canyon wall in a rolling barrage that lasted 3 seconds and rearranged approximately 10,000 years of geology. The wall collapsed, boulders the size of cars tumbling into the canyon floor, cutting off the exit completely. The truck skidded to a stop, trapped. Its occupants bilayed out, dragging the pilots with them, using them as human shields. Lyra came around for another pass, descending to 200 feet, and this time she didn't fire. She just flew straight and level over their position, close enough that they could see the titanium bathtub protecting her cockpit, close enough that the roar of her engines was a physical force, close enough that they understood she could have killed them all but chose otherwise. The message was clear. Release the pilots, or the next pass would be the last thing they'd see. For 30 seconds, nobody moved. Then one of the guards cut the zip ties and shoved Captain Reeves forward. The other pilots followed, stumbling across the rocky ground, putting distance between themselves and their captors. Lyra circled overhead, watching, her finger resting on the trigger of her remaining Maverick missiles. The enemy fighters weren't stupid. They could see their vehicles burning, their anti-aircraft systems destroyed, their carefully prepared ambush turned into a disaster area. They retreated toward the surviving trucks, keeping low, keeping their weapons pointed at the ground in a universal gesture of surrender. Lyra didn't trust it, but she also didn't have a choice. Her fuel gauge was pushing into the yellow. The weather system control had mentioned was rolling in, thick clouds already obscuring the northern peaks, and she just violated about 15 different articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Time to collect her charges and leave before someone in command figured out how to order her shot down. She keyed her radio. Viper 1, Widow 1-1 on guard. If you can hear me, light up your emergency beacons and get clear of the canyon. I need you 100 meters from any structure in the next 60 seconds. Captain Reeves' voice came back immediate and hoarse. Widow 1-1, Viper 1, we copy. Moving now. And whoever you are up there, thank you. Save it for the debrief, Viper. Just run. She watched them sprint across the valley floor, 5 silhouettes against the burning wreckage, their emergency beacons painting bright dots on her infrared display. They made it to a clear area near the western wall and dropped flat, smart enough to know what came next. Lyra circled once more, confirming the enemy fighters were staying back, then climbed to 5,000 feet and radioed Bagram with coordinates for immediate helicopter extraction. Her voice was professional, empty of the adrenaline that was probably going to hit her later like a freight train. The extraction took 40 minutes. 2 Black Hawks came in fast and low, their door gunners ready for a fight that never materialized. The enemy fighters had melted back into the mountains, taking their wounded and whatever pride they could salvage. The F-16s remained on the valley floor, ghost ships in the darkness, waiting for a recovery team that would arrive with the dawn. Captain Reeves and his wingmen were loaded aboard the helicopters, checked for injuries, wrapped in thermal blankets against the cold. As the Black Hawks climbed out of the canyon, Reeves looked up through the open door and saw the A-10 still circling overhead, watching, making sure they made it out safe. The ugly duckling of American aviation, the aircraft every fighter pilot made jokes about at the bar, the plane that couldn't break the sound barrier if you dropped it out of orbit. Flown tonight by someone whose call sign he didn't know, whose face he'd never seen, who just committed career suicide to pull his ass out of a trap he'd walked into with all his textbook flying and tactical precision. He made a note to learn her name, to shake her hand, to apologize for every smug comment he'd ever made about A-10 drivers being the minor leagues of military aviation. The Black Hawks vanished into the mountains, and Lyra turned the A-10 toward home, alone in the darkness with her thoughts and the blinking fuel gauge and the certain knowledge that, when she landed, there would be a reception committee waiting that wouldn't be offering congratulations. The flight back to Bagram took 42 minutes, and Lyra spent it composing her defense in her head. Temporary loss of radio communication. Imminent threat to captured personnel. Dynamic battlefield conditions requiring immediate action. The classic excuses, and none of them would matter because everyone in the command chain knew the truth. She'd ignored a direct order because she decided her judgment was better than theirs, which it had been. But that wasn't how military hierarchy worked. The base appeared ahead, a constellation of lights in the dark plain. She radioed Tower for landing clearance and received it in a voice that was carefully neutral, professionally distant. They knew she was in trouble. Everyone knew. As she descended toward the runway, she could see vehicles already moving toward the flight line, official cars with official people ready to have official conversations about her career trajectory. The A-10 touched down with a gentle thump, the landing gear taking the weight without complaint. Torres would have his work cut out for him. She'd counted at least 30 bullet strikes during her post-combat checks, plus stress damage from the high-G turns, plus whatever wear came from pushing a 30-year-old airframe through maneuvers that probably voided several warranties. But the old bird had brought her home. It always did. She taxied to her hardstand and shut down the engines, watching the turbofan spin down to silence. For a moment, she just sat there in the darkness of the cockpit, breathing, feeling the adrenaline finally hit her system like a delayed explosion. Her hands started to shake, and she gripped the stick harder until they stopped. Not yet. She could fall apart later. Right now, she needed to face whatever came next with the same composure she'd shown in the canyon. The reception committee was waiting when she climbed down from the cockpit. Two colonels, a major from JAG and someone in civilian clothes who probably meant intelligence, wanted a conversation. They didn't speak as she removed her helmet and survival vest, didn't offer the usual post-mission debrief small talk. The silence was pointed, deliberate, designed to make her uncomfortable. It didn't work. Lyra had spent 5 years being uncomfortable. "Captain Kess," the senior colonel said, his voice flat, "you are ordered to report to the base commander's office immediately. Do not speak to anyone about tonight's mission. Do not discuss it on any electronic communication. Is that clear?" "Yes, sir." "Your weapon has been flagged for investigation. Your flight status is suspended pending review. You are confined to base until further notice." "Understood, sir." They walked her to the headquarters building like she was under arrest, which technically she might be. Inside, the corridors were too bright and too quiet, every footstep echoing off tile floors. Lyra kept her eyes forward, her face neutral, her mind already 3 steps ahead, trying to anticipate what came next. Court-martial, probably. Dishonorable discharge, possibly. They'd make an example of her, use her case to reinforce the chain of command. Show every other hotshot pilot what happened when you decided the rules didn't apply. The base commander's office was corner suite, windows overlooking the airfield. Behind the desk sat Colonel Morrison, a 30-year veteran with 2 stars in his future if he didn't make waves. Standing beside him was Captain Reeves, still in his flight suit, face pale but composed. And sitting in the corner, almost invisible, was a 3-star general Lyra didn't recognize. This was worse than she'd thought. Colonel Morrison gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Captain Kess." She sat, hands folded in her lap, and waited for the hammer to fall. Morrison opened a folder, scanned the contents, then looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. "You want to explain to me what you were thinking tonight?" "I was thinking the mission required immediate action, sir. I assessed the tactical situation and determined that waiting for a support package would result in the loss of 5 aircraft and 5 pilots." "You disobeyed a direct order." "Yes, sir." "You engaged enemy forces without authorization." "Yes, sir." "You put yourself and a multi-million-dollar aircraft at unnecessary risk." "The aircraft is fine, sir. Senior Airman Torres will have it combat-ready in 72 hours. Morrison's jaw tightened. "That's not the point, Captain. The point is—" "The point," the 3-star general interrupted, standing up from his corner, "is that Captain Kess accomplished in 40 minutes what would have taken us 3 days and cost who knows how many casualties." He crossed to the desk and tossed down a satellite photograph. "This was taken 30 minutes ago. Our friends in that canyon scattered like roaches when the lights came on. They left behind 5 intact F-16s, a treasure trove of intelligence on their electronic warfare capabilities, and enough equipment to keep our analysts busy for months. All because one A-10 pilot decided to color outside the lines." Lyra kept her expression neutral, but inside she was recalculating everything. This didn't sound like the preamble to a court-martial. The general looked at her directly for the first time. "I'm General Holland, Joint Special Operations Command. I've been tracking this electronic warfare cell for 8 months. They've been operating with impunity, forcing our aircraft down and stealing technology we can't afford to lose. Tonight, you broke them. You broke them so thoroughly they'll be years recovering." He paused. "You also violated about 15 regulations and made command look like idiots for not authorizing your attack when you requested it." "Sir, I'm not finished. Here's what's going to happen. Officially, you followed standing rules of engagement for rescue operations in a hot zone. Your actions were within the scope of battlefield autonomy granted to combat pilots. The inquiry will find no fault. Your record will remain clean." He leaned forward. "Unofficially, You scared the hell out of everyone in the command chain, and they're going to be watching you like hawks. You pull something like this again without better justification, and I won't be able to protect you. Understood? Understood, sir. Good. General Holland straightened, then did something unexpected. He smiled. Captain Reeves here has been telling me about your flying. Says you handled that A-10 like it was welded to your spine. Says he's never seen anyone lay down precision fire in a canyon that narrow. Says he owes you his life and wants to make sure you get proper recognition. Reeves spoke up, his voice rough with exhaustion and something else. I spent 6 hours sitting in that cave, listening to them talk about what they'd do with our jets, convinced I'd never see home again. Then I heard this sound like God's own chainsaw, and I knew someone was coming for us. I didn't know it was you, Captain. I didn't know it was an A-10. I just knew someone cared enough to risk everything. He met her eyes. Thank you doesn't cover it. Lyra felt something shift in her chest, some weight she'd been carrying for 5 years suddenly lighter. You would have done the same, sir. Maybe, but I wouldn't have done it as well. The meeting lasted another 20 minutes, covering details and security classifications and the official story that would be fed to the media. When it was over, Lyra walked out of headquarters into the pre-dawn darkness, free and suspended, and unsure what any of it meant for her future. The other officers had gone ahead, leaving her alone on the empty walkway. Except she wasn't alone. Torres was sitting on a bench near the flight line, still wearing his maintenance coveralls, covered in hydraulic fluid and gunpowder residue. He stood when he saw her. Captain, heard you weren't getting court-martialed. Heard right. Good, would have been a waste. He gestured toward the hardstand where the A-10 sat under floodlights, already swarmed by maintenance crew. She took 37 hits tonight. 7 in the left engine, 12 in the fuselage, 18 in the wings and tail. Not a single one penetrated anything vital. That titanium bathtub did exactly what it was designed to do. She's a good bird. She's got a good pilot. Torres handed her something, a piece of shrapnel 30 millimeters across, probably from one of her own cannon rounds that ricocheted off the canyon wall. Thought you might want a souvenir. Maintenance guys were joking that you're lucky. I told them luck had nothing to do with it. Lyra turned the shrapnel over in her hand, feeling its weight, its sharp edges smoothed by impact. What did you tell them then? Told them you've been preparing for this mission your whole career. Told them when everyone else was chasing glory, you were learning your aircraft and your battle space and what it means to bring people home. Told them widow isn't an insult, it's a promise. He smiled. Told them anyone who survives what you put that bird through tonight earned the right to be called whatever the hell they want. She looked at the shrapnel, then at Torres, then at the A-10 being swarmed by crew who were probably going to spend the next 3 days putting it back together. Somewhere in the darkness, Captain Reeves and his wingmen were being debriefed, examined, returned to the land of the living. 5 pilots who'd be flying again within the week, thanks to 1 obsolete aircraft and 1 pilot who'd stopped caring what other people thought. Get some rest, Torres. Long day tomorrow. You too, Captain. But she didn't rest. She went back to her quarters, showered off the sweat and fear, and sat at her desk with the piece of shrapnel and a bottle of water that tasted like dust. The sun was coming up outside, painting the mountains gold and pink, the same mountains that had nearly swallowed 6 aircraft and turned into a career-ending disaster. She thought about all the times she'd been overlooked, dismissed, given the missions nobody else wanted. She thought about the young lieutenant who couldn't meet her eyes while delivering her briefing. She thought about the whispers that followed her through every ready room. Widow. They'd meant it as mockery, as a reminder that she flew slow and careful, that she survived missions other pilots would have turned into glory runs. They'd meant it to diminish her, to put her in her place, to make sure she knew she wasn't one of the real fighter pilots with their Mach 2 speeds and their air-to-air kills. But tonight, in that canyon, Widow had meant something else. It had meant the thing that comes after everything dies.